It's easy to dismiss the yin and the yang of Ubisoft Montreal's single-player projects versus their multiplayer ones. This is the same studio that played out the novelty of mediocre single-player sandboxes, but now they're making pretty good multiplayer games. For Honor marks the second time in recent history that they put out a big, cutting-edge AAA game as a dedicated multiplayer release, and just like with Siege, the game that came out of it is surprisingly complicated and difficult and a little old school. It's also one of the most compelling learning experiences I've had in years. Underneath its flashy presentation and bombastic battles is the learning curve of understanding a highly technical system of one-on-one melees that will probably feel accessible to only two camps of players: fans of Souls games and fans of fighting games. Even though one look at gameplay footage shows you that the camera and controls here aren't copycats of either genre. It's like Souls because everyone's slowly plodding around in enough metal armor to build a taco truck. Swings are heavy and slow and subtract from a stamina meter that renders you nearly harmless if you drain it. There's a real feel of weight behind every move you make, which means you gotta commit to every move you make, via a lineup of animations so slow and deliberate that some may call the game unresponsive. But the more valid comparison really does come with drawing parallels to fighting games, because the moment-to-moment action here is operating on bona fide fighting game logic. Your two shoulder buttons are for light and heavies, with your sticks right, left, or up position, basically standing in for the standing or crouching stances of a fighting game. And understanding For Honor in the same terms you understand fighting games is when the whole system begins to make sense. It's not unresponsive at all. Like any good fighting game, perfectly timing inputs can have you changing your action faster than mashing. You're supposed to memorize specific combos and hammer them out depending on how you predict the opponent to react to your moves. Muscle memory is a layer above strategic judgment, and learning the convoluted game logic of when a charged shoulder bash can cancel into a guard break for a two-hit side combo is how you get good. With every character having a modest move list of diverse playstyles, there's so much to learn here that I'd imagine you can already see a huge disparity between players who just watch the tutorial videos and those who don't. They're kind of hard to find, but make sure you do that. But somehow, I feel like it's not just the idea of making a third-person fighting game built for online play that truly determined For Honor's style. One of the first things I noticed from gameplay footage was this knight here, the Warden, holds the blade of their sword with their hands, which is something that was apparently a legit historical German sword-fighting technique that would seem really nasty for your fingertips, but if you ever get a chance to see those really dorky weapon demonstrations, the experts will stress to you how broadswords in real life were oftentimes used more like blunt clubs rather than blades. And you don't see that in games often. And that's because Jason Vandenberg, the crazy beard man behind this project, is someone who's really dorky about historical fighting. For Honor was inspired by a real-life sword-fighting course, but it wouldn't be accurate to call this kind of gameplay realistic. After all, this is a game where hammering out a super combo catches your sword on fire. But all of this intricately animated swordplay is full of tons of neat little details that let you know the designers were way into this stuff. So even though these knights, Vikings, and samurai existed thousands of miles and hundreds of years apart from each other, they're slapping each other around with a style that doesn't exactly evoke high fantasy here. There's apparently a story behind it. Believe it or not, For Honor has a campaign, with multiplayer co-op. It's not even a really bad one at that.
It came without warning.
Oh no! A magical fissure has opened up the Earth's crust and broken the space-time continuum. People from all sorts of different times and places are meeting up, but watch out, they don't all get along. Story missions basically have you hack and slashing through combat tunnels from point A to B, bookended by cutscenes of monotone gravelly voice actors bobbing their heads to the dialogue. Because animating faces is so much easier when everyone's face is a helmet.
One of us should go home and change.
It's thoroughly okay. The predictability and repetition of these levels don't exactly make the penultimate video game experience here, and I have a feeling a lot of potential was lost from simply how seriously it takes itself. A gray, gravelly tone colors the Knight and Samurai campaigns, but the Vikings, on the other hand, at least they have a sense of humor. and also a sense of spectacle, especially with this Saving Private Ryan beach landing routine where Viking longships are crashing onto the shores of a feudal Japanese fortress. This is the dumbest thing I've seen in my life. It's great. This is the team slapping Hollywood historical warriors together like they're action figures for at least one great level. But one-off set pieces and tunnely level design isn't as important to the campaign as are AIs that can hack and slash back at you. And this AI was used to create a lineup of bots for the multiplayer modes who will guarantee you have something to do if other players aren't around. And they're really, really good bots too, with some telepathic fighting game AI that makes them a decent sparring partner. The first thing I did when I played the open beta of this game and logged on to some online matches was get creamed. The first thing I did when I had the launch review code was practice with bots for hours, almost 10 hours straight actually. I just set them to the hardest difficulty, picked a pretty map, opened up some smooth jazzy soundtrack in the background, and when I got online the next day, suddenly I was doing at least okay. The skill disparity between myself and a friend who'd been playing fighting games his whole life was already substantial, but that gap was still small compared to yet another friend who made us both look like chumps. Backing out and sparring against just that guy for 90 minutes was like training with Pai Mei in the mountains for years to have my revenge.
Got a hit in. Oh, I did one hit. Someone in Twitch chat just said, have you ever seen a training montage go on long enough that the master got better? Ho ho! Oh, man! Oh! Alright. I'm good. I'm good. Woo!
And now, I knew all the secret techniques, which correlates with the game's balancing issues. For Honor is a heavily defensive fighting game. You have a lot of options to counter and immediately punish almost anything an opponent can throw at you, which turns a lot of matches into staring contests of who has the guts to attack first. For newer players, this means a character like the Warlord is super preferable. His shield gives him a lot of options for turtling up and capitalizing on that defensive playstyle. It's easy to punish attacks with this block and poke, and one of his more elaborate counter combos can guarantee a knockdown if your opponent has already used up some stamina. But after climbing the ranks, you'll see people relying on the Warden more, because this guy has a couple much more effective offensive moves than everyone else. A homing shoulder bash and a quick zone attack slap can both come in so fast that unless you specifically know to expect that specific cheese, it can be really hard to block. But still, everything can be countered, and right now the grand equalizer, the universal counter that everyone can use, is a grab that immediately cuts through anyone's guard that requires some real specific timing and circumstances to counter. But making the window for that guard break counter a bit more generous is right here on their to-do list, so that's gonna change soon. But until then, the idea of giving players a reliable way to break defenses seems like the path to polishing this game up. What would be harder to change is the weird problem of its big, bombastic, back-of-the-box battlefield mode not really being the showstopper here. With the midfield clogged up with these really unfortunate little AI cannon fodders and capture points that you gotta always rush to and guard, fights in the Dominion mode more often than not end with a retreat rather than a good clean kill to the finish. I find myself more often than not picking up the kills of other people's fights in this mode and turning the tides with these kill streak rewards instead of having good clean one-on-one duels, and that's not very honorable. Plus, with that one-on-one dueling still being the crux of the combat, a tight-knit squad of team play won't be winning battles here either. Even though they're taking cues from it, this is not Rainbow Six Siege. You might get better play with a group of friends in that game, but you might get better play solo over here, because For Honor is really all about the excellent duel mode. Everything else kind of feels like window dressing next to some simple, honorable one-on-one sword fights. But outside of that, there's just 2v2s and 4v4s. It's weird that there's no real free-for-all mode, so players can go full Jedi Outcast Jedi Academy with it and just hang out in these maps waiting around the dueling rings, taking turns fighting each other without the whole scoreboard being split into two teams. That'd be cool. But you still have a great gameplay system here with 4 different multiplayer modes, the player versus AI variations with customizable bot options, plus the thoroughly okay 8-hour combat tunnel campaign, so it's kind of hard for me to imagine what's missing here that undercuts the game's $60 price tag. Seems like everything's accounted and present for. Except for some stuff going on the character customization options that open the door for microtransactions. Now, with the way they've implemented it, I found that this part of the game can be easily ignored. No matter what you do to your characters, they're still gonna look like the same character. And though a lot of the equipment affects stats, they do it in such minuscule amounts that they're really not gonna make that much of a difference. Everything purchasable can be slowly grinded to be unlocked, and you don't really have to bother doing that. Unlike Siege, you can immediately play as all the characters without unlocking them. All that unlocking them actually does is let you change their clothes. Plus, the smaller duel modes turn all that stuff off anyway, but I know the fact that it's there is going to turn a lot of people off regardless, but for me, the one real chink in this game's armor comes from the weird quasi-peer-to-peer networking leading to these sudden disconnects. It's important to make a distinction between latency issues and those sudden disconnects, because in my time with the game, latency wasn't really an issue. For Honor's wind-up animations are long enough that I have a feeling that the way the lag compensation works is by giving the defenders priority of deciding when they block on their side of the screen rather than on the attackers. Thanks to the lock-on camera system and all the animation interpolation going on, they've got a pretty decent way to work around the typical issues of playing fighting games online. Because for all my time with it, I never really felt like any perfectly timed parries and blocks weren't registering. But about once a day, I'd get caught in this loop. Once one player leaves, everyone else has to wait a bit for everyone to synchronize. Unfortunately, that sometimes makes the whole game break. Which is really and truly probably the only thing I don't enjoy about this game. Everything else is peachy. The journey of learning its tricks was one of the most rewarding and compelling processes of learning something intimidating and using what I learned to great effect. But the big problem I foresee with For Honor is that learning curve. This is a very core game where players aren't really going to be competitive. Hell, they're not even going to be viable if they don't watch a bunch of tutorial videos, go down everyone's move list one by one, practice on the dummies and duel with the bots for hours before really being able to stack up against real players. And with skill disparities that wide, I can also imagine experienced players getting stuck in a rut where new players are so easy that they're boring to fight against, and the good players are so untouchably good, why even bother? But the upside to that is that at least those guys will be having a damn good time. And I think I'm pretty sure I've gotten sucked in. I'm gonna try to be right there with them over the coming weeks, because there's nothing more satisfying than seeing all that hard work beautifully pay off.